Yeah.
Yeah,
Got it.
so maybe we can just talk about the exciting world of the web and AI and all this crazy stuff that's going on at the moment.
It's happening, Matthew. It's happening so fast. And I don't know what to make of it, so I'm glad to be here. And maybe we'll figure it all out together.
Yeah,
What do
I
you
think
think?
there's just so much going on at once now. I mean, as we speak, the TikTok hearings are going on in the US, right? Where the I guess the TikTok CEO or something is being grilled by, I guess, Congress about, is TikTok a security risk for the US? And I know that in the UK and also in the US, TikTok's been banned in lots of like government settings, right? So in the UK, if you work in the government in any capacity, you can't sort of be, walking around with the TikTok app on your phone and that kind of thing. Yeah, so exciting times, really.
Well, and that I'm not paying that close attention. I get most of my news just from Twitter headlines, to tell you the truth. Like somebody's tweeted something, and it, Twitter's become a real cesspool lately, in my
Yeah.
opinion. But I've always felt that it's just it's basic the quality. Is there any quality anymore? But it's just based on who you're following on Twitter determines what comes across your screen. But I've managed just to seem to stay abreast of things that I'm interested in. So of
Yeah.
course I'm aware of the TikTok hearings, but I'm more curious about what is the security risk that they're talking about, and what does that
So
mean to you? Can you help me understand who are they concerned about when they're saying there's a security risk?
so one of the issues is this thing called BYOD, bring your own device, right?
Hmm.
So BYOD is this kind of, I guess, concept that employees have their own laptops and phones or whatever, and they're often bringing those to work anyway. So lots of IT departments have this idea of bring your own device. And of course, it saves money for the company because instead of them buying a bunch of laptops, they would instead have maybe a suite of software and some shared drives at work, and you bring in your laptop, join the company Wi-Fi network and get to work. So that's one issue, is that people are using, in some contexts, people are using their own device for work. And I think, I mean, whenever you install an app on your phone, it asks asks for a lot of access to your phone. Even the
Mm-hmm.
most simple app will say things like, for this app to work, it needs access to your files, your location, your camera, your microphone. So if you think, of course, TikTok, it's designed not just for consuming these short videos, but also for making the videos yourself. So by
Mm-hmm.
default, it helps itself, to your access to your camera and to your microphone.
Mm-hmm.
If a government employee has TikTok on their phone, and if TikTok is, insecure by design, and for example, maybe is recording audio, accessing audio when you think it's not,
Mm-hmm.
then it could pick up some very interesting things in a government office. It could pick up some very sophisticated things like the sound of someone typing in their password, and there's software you can get that will take that sound and reconstruct the keystrokes from it, right? Audio Tempest, I think it's called. And of course, if it's accessing camera, that can be a huge security issue as well if government employees are in secure areas, and and of course just accessing files on the phone. I mean, I heard a seemingly trivial example last year of a hiking app that tracked. And then I was there. It was a running app, and it sort of tracked your run, and you could it would by default it would say like can I have access to your Twitter, so it can tweet Scott completed 5k a 5k run this morning in 30 minutes, but it shared the route. And then of course people noticed, well, not of course, but people noticed there were lots of users doing like a 5 kilometer run, but around very, very short distance track. You think, well, what context would that be? Yes, it could be people at a running track, but then if you combine it with the Google Maps, you think, oh, well, maybe this is a military base where the Marines are waking up in the morning and going for their morning 5k. So there are situations like that where an app can leak a lot of information, particularly if it's hooked up to social media. I mean, you see all these people with Fitbits and all these bits of hardware that monitor them and share by default. But in the case of TikTok, there's the idea that essentially all Chinese companies are deeply connected with the Chinese government. They often have people from the Chinese military in high positions in the companies. We have the whole thing going on at the moment with the US about chips. The US is very concerned that there are Chinese chip manufacturers that are a very big key part of the microchip supply chain in the world. And it's kind of concerning if China is going to be a future over enemy. It is a bit of a concern if so many microchips are made by Chinese companies. There's kind of economic dangers, but also security dangers. I mean, if you're able to make the chips that US companies are using in their products, you can sneak clever things in. You can have completely passive surveillance that maybe adjusts the timing of a signal on the chip that then kind of leaks out across a network. So it wouldn't be detected by normal sort of anti-hack or antivirus software. You can do these very subtle things using what are called covert channels, so network jitter, or like leak something about the power consumption, and that can be a very good way to break crypto, because you can get hints about the passwords from like the power consumption of the chip. You can get hints about how the encryption algorithm's working. So yeah, I mean, it's incredible. We walk around with all this computer power. It's doing all this monitoring. It's sharing stuff, sometimes without us knowing. And I've just found with the apps, you don't have any choice if you want. So for example, I recently installed WhatsApp, I think it's called, just because someone that was the main thing they used, and immediately WhatsApp wanted to access the contacts in my phone. Now I said no, and then that means you have to use like a little trick to even add someone, because it's completely set up to add people from your contacts. And if you don't allow it to, which I don't want WhatsApp to have access to my phone contacts, then it makes the app a bit tricky to use. There's some kind of little hack where you can make a web address with someone's phone number in and sort of do some copy and pasting, and there's a way to get that to work with WhatsApp. But yes, I mean that's what the whole TikTok thing is about at the moment. It's TikTok say they're a company, they are separate from the Chinese government. The American people have First Amendment, allows them to use things like TikTok in theory. There are many American businesses using TikTok, so those are the sort of things that the TikTok say in their defense. But various US politicians, I mean, it seems to be one of the few things that are uniting both the Republicans with the Democrats at the moment is their concern about TikTok. So.
As always, that's a comprehensive explanation, and it points to so many other things. But is it only the Chinese government that is using? Do we even know that it's being used in these sinister ways? You're describing the capability to monitor and surveil, which we've had this conversation several times over the years. But is it only the Chinese that are doing it?
No, so we had a big case a few years ago. I think it was a Swiss cryptography company where it turned out that the Swiss intelligence services had been working with them. But of course, the British did this as well after World War II. The British seized a lot of those German Enigma machines. So the Enigma was a military cipher system based on a commercial one from before World War II. So the British seized all these Enigma machines, and we now know that the British had broken the Enigma codes during World War II. So after World War II, the British government gave these Enigma machines to Commonwealth countries all around the world, because of, keep your friends close but your enemies closer kind of thing. But in this case, keep your friends close because they may be your enemies in the future or something. So these were countries that were allied to the UK, but the British government gave them all these encryption machines, knowing that British intelligence services could break Enigma codes. We've also seen with the US company Cisco, they allowed the US intelligence services to put chips in the devices to allow them to monitor at network level. So no, it's certainly not just the Chinese government doing it at all.
Which brings me just to this point of not confusion, but just surveillance seems to be just the default state of this internet type of connection that we have, that all of the data is passing through some tube somewhere, and can be duplicated instantly and stored. So it makes me wonder, as just a semi-normal user wanting to participate in these online communities and share media and stuff, that I need to connect my computer to the internet and use these applications. And I sort of assume it's the case, and I haven't taken any countermeasures yet. I keep thinking I should, but it's a it's a big job. But I sort of assume that at some level, something I've installed in my computer has given somebody somewhere complete access to everything on my hard drive, and can duplicate everything, could actually take control of my computer without even knowing it. Isn't this technologically possible?
Yes, and it could be built in at hardware level as well.
Yeah.
None of us really are able to build up a computer from scratch, from chips to use.
So really, none of us are safe. This is going on all the time. It's just part of the landscape or the ecosystem. So why now this current moment of hysteria? And let me just say one more thing. I remember talking to you when I was staying at your house about something I'd heard on a podcast. It was called Electric Politics, and it was some guy who had been in the State Department, and he had a falling out, I think, over the Yugoslavia situation in the 90s, and his enemy was Holbrooke. Remember Richard Holbrooke?
Yes. Yeah.
So this guy was, an established State Department intelligence type who had all sorts of access, and he would just have these fascinating conversations. And I guess this was early days of the Gulf War, so there was all sorts of there were characters showing up who seemed to be opposed to how U.S. foreign policy was unfolding at that time, and this was one of those guys. And he had one guy talking about who had been a high-level CIA intelligence guy. Well, they're all intelligence guys. The guy was retired, but talking about I suppose it was repercussions from the Patriot Act that whole thing with sucking all of the phone records out of the AT&T center in San Francisco. Remember that?
Yep.
That the host was asking this career intelligence professional, what will the American people think when they find out that all of their stuff is being monitored by the US government? And the guy's response was, well, it's already happening with Google, that just the way the internet is and the way people willfully and willingly sign on to these services gives complete access to the same thing that now the US government is able to do as codified in law, where previously suppose the US government could have done it without it. But you get my point here, that the intelligence guy was saying, well, the people don't care, it's already happening. And it's just the nature of online life. Is my point clear? You see what I'm saying?
No, very, yeah. And I mean, I think it's a very strong argument, right? That, maybe surveillance isn't the issue at all, and it's just everyone is oversharing. And, I think there's, like with young people, it's almost a joke where like someone will show a photo proudly holding their first credit card, and people write comments like, show us the other side too, because of course the other side you get the card verification check. Well, with those two things and a little bit of Googling to find a person's address, you can then, buy whatever you want. And I mean, people, most sensible people know you shouldn't show a photo of your credit card, but then some people may show a photo of their car key for their first car or for their first apartment. Look, I got my first car. Very natural thing to do, but of course, it's very easy now. You can cut a key from a JPEG photo. I mean, how about just a thumbs up thing, and then there's a fingerprint that can then be, you can use a very simple bit of software to enhance the fingerprint well enough to overcome most fingerprint identification systems. So you could use that to get into the person's iPhone or whatever if they've set it to read a fingerprint. So, what about all these retina scan stuff? If you remember in that rather corny movie Sneakers, there's a voice authentication thing where you say, my voice is my passport, verify me to access this. I think it was a door access control. And now some dumb high street banks in the UK have been using phone voice verification to let people do their banking, and it's very easy to get by with a crude way is to make a soundboard of like clips of the person's voice.
Oh yeah.
But now we can use AI, so you get a sample of their voice, and then you use AI that will say whatever you like in their voice, right? So if the banking system, asks some tricky question that you can't ask with a soundboard, if you've got the AI set up with 15 seconds of their audio as a voice sample, then you can easily, if it says, mother's maiden name or whatever, you can quickly do that. So I mean, you and I are very concerned with education, and that, a lot of this comes to like, what should we be educating young people about, making use of the web and taking advantage of all this fantastic technology, but without, oversharing, and, things that you share that may be completely safe to share now may not be safe in the future. Of course, once it's out there, it's out there. You can't get the toothpaste back in a toothpaste tube. So, it's very difficult to kind of predict what is going to be dangerous to have shared. So,
yeah. And for one who's been sharing, talking about myself since 2004 when I started podcasting, and even before that with even back into the before 2000s on the Usenet groups.
Mm.
That stuff is still there. I've found some old threads that I was on, not recently, but all that stuff it still persists. I don't know. And then you look at, and I don't know how, if this is worth bringing up, but we have the case of the Hunter Biden laptop.
Yes.
And I'm not at all, well, you can't talk about it without the whole, at least being reminded of the whole politics and all of that. But the most recent thing I've heard, which has probably been out there for a while, is that he was drugged up somewhere and became unconscious, and a Russian operative made a copy of his hard drive. And then that became property of somebody, and other people tried to get it. And then what appears on this supposed hard drive now has been supposedly, what I've heard, doctored up and changed. Some of it is authentic material that he had, and then other stuff was these crudely forged documents, and all of that's been used to build a case, which is now very much in the public commons of American political discourse. So it's not just the idea of stuff being sucked down through the internet pipes. It's the idea of what's on your computer is you, and can actually then become evidence in a court case. And then it's, again, I hate to spin into paranoid territory, and please bring me back to more safe waters. But I always wonder, just because it's on my hard drive, if there's something sinister on my hard drive, is it possible I don't even know it's there, that I did not put it there, that somebody else through one of these applications or permissions granted could store stuff on my computer, and then
absolutely, or use your computer and your internet connection to attack other computers. You remember that all that botnet stuff that used to be really big, zombified computers,
right?
Or I mean,
let me throw one more thing out there, because you get what I'm saying, but here's what I wonder. So I don't want to mention the particular issue that keeps popping up, at least in American life, but then people do go to court for stuff that's been found on their computers, and there are homes that are raided in the middle of the night by the police and the FBI. The person goes to trial, and since it's on the computer, it gets admitted as evidence. But is there any level of scrutiny of that evidence? Is the prosecutor going to check what's there to find out if it was planted by somebody else, or came as a result of botnet activity? Or is that the defense team's responsibility?
Exactly.
And are defense lawyers aware enough? Or you know what I mean? Or is the legal profession tracking this? And is it possible that people get convicted and put in jail for some horrible piece of data on their computer that they never even knew was there? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that happens frequently, and I mean, part of it comes down to, can you afford a better expert witness than the prosecution, right? Because you get your expert says, this this computer has been compromised, and look, the timestamps have been faked on the files or whatever. And the prosecution's expert witness gets an electron microscope and scans the hard disk or something and kind of says, no, these are genuine files. But I mean, another much more mundane thing would be if it's not about data on the computer, but about the access, neighbors sharing each other's Wi-Fi, either with permission or without permission. Or an example I saw was someone who had this was not even it has a computing parallel, but this was someone who had bought physical boxes of antique material, and the house was raided for whatever reason, and some questionable things were found. And this guy said, well, you buy this stuff at auction, a sealed box of 500 and turn of the century photos or whatever. And of course, online, you might download a folder of something. Let's you might download a folder of public domain stock photography, and could easily, contain thousands of images. And you look for the 3 by name that you wanted to use, and then you've got all this stuff on the computer that you haven't selected. And yeah, where's the and of course there's all the thing about the liability. There's issues with, to what extent is Google responsible if they help people find things? Or what about the ISP? In the US, often people's internet connection is via a cable company. Bizarrely, we don't do that in normal countries, but in the US, often a cable company is often a content provider, a publisher and a telecoms company. So what laws most apply to them? It's a big thing with Twitter at the moment. Is should companies like Twitter and Facebook be responsible for stuff that's shared on their platform? Because if they are responsible, then it's difficult with something like Twitter, where you'd have to have some kind of buffering system where people tweet something, and then even if it's just going through an algorithm with some AI, there'd have to be a little delay, and a certain percentage of those posts would then be looked at by a human, I guess. So you couldn't really have this sort of instant thing. So yeah, I mean, all of this stuff is happening at once, I think, because it just feels in last year and this year that technology has jumped so far ahead of where we're at. So far ahead of people's understanding of it, of people's behavior. I mean, you and I have talked before about Chat GPT and the impact on it on education, when it doesn't really make any sense to send students home to write an essay when they can get a reasonable essay with a 2-line prompt from Chat GPT. And the sort of anti-plagiarism tools aren't sophisticated enough to be able to find it, because it's in a sense it's not plagiarism, right? It is generated. It's not like one of these essay mills that are churning out content, and you can you could Google the first paragraph of someone's essay, and you might find that they've copy and pasted it from a website somewhere. It's not that at all. This is unique generated content. And the Chat GPT is sort of doing a human-like process of collating a load of sources and interpreting some things. And but yeah, it just seems that the tech has jumped so far so quickly, and at the moment it's free or dirt cheap, which is amazing as well.
While you're
in a bad way.
While you're saying that, a thought that's been bouncing around just became a little more solid for me. So let me try to put it into words, and no telling how or where that will go. But talking about education and students being able to generate essays just with a couple of lines of prompt makes me wonder, is the 5-paragraph essay, at least that's what we call it here in the States, what students are taught to produce and create through the composition courses that are taught, is that the most important thing for students to be learning how to do, to structure their thoughts and organize them in this 5-paragraph format? What ChatGPT or the AI shows us that it really is child's play. Just get a couple of salient ideas and some connecting points in the better context that you put into your prompt, makes a more readable and nice looking essay. But what's the benefit to the individual learner spending the hours to understand and develop the writing process just to write a 5-paragraph essay and what are we going to need 5-paragraph essays for in the future? So maybe, you know, now I'm going to make a weird stretch, and I sort of get this idea from Vinay Gupta, the guy who came up with the Hexier, and he's big in Ethereum and Materium and all this other stuff. But he was talking about US politics one time, and the whole way of the long time span between election and presidential elections and the inauguration, the several months, and the time schedule for the representatives and senators. It was all designed in the late 18th, early 19th century, the structure of American government, and the logistics of it still remain today. And it's not technologically required, but back then it was technologically required, because people were getting from their home district to Washington, D.C. by horse or carriage or whatever. So too is what's been taught in the schools, being taught in the schools based on a level of civilization and society that is kind of similarly obsolete or gone. And
and it has
I'm all over the place here, but that's kind of what I'm wondering now, that is this sudden dumping upon us of this AI technology meant to, but when you say meant to, it means that somebody's actually driving it. I don't know if it's intentional or unintentional, but does it give us an opportunity to really rethink the way everything is structured and organized and things are done? And I'm thinking now, again, sorry for jumping all over the place, but if a person were to just put in their take on the state of the world today and where things are going, and then ask ChatGPT to project forward what are the possible outcomes, a lot of what we're thinking and what we're looking at and what we understand sort of leads to catastrophic circumstances, environmentally, socially, economically. You know, that is ChatGPT in some way have the possibility, or AI have the possibility, to wake people up to the possibility or the reality that things are kind of going in. I don't want to be all alarmist, but you know, we need to rethink the way so many things are done, and perhaps that's one of the outcomes of people using this tool in a certain sort of reflective, contemplative way and asking the right questions. Oh, I'm going to stop because now I'm confusing myself. And
well, no, I don't think you've been jumping around at all, because I think, I mean, that's the whole thing, is like chat GPT or you know, cheap unlimited computing power does reveal it makes you question, you know, the 5-paragraph essay is much more about utility for the educator than to the student, right? It's, you know, education is rotten to the core because it's what's easy to measure, right? It's, you know, everything is about what's easy to test, easy to measure, easy to record. And like you say, that a lot of the content taught is, I mean, it's been obsolete for forever. So I don't know if in the US, I'm sure you at least at some point had this thing called long division.
Oh yeah.
So long division, the standard method of long division was invented in Victorian England when paper was very expensive. So you needed a very compact thing that was, you know, of course, you needed long division because you had to divide things sometimes with multiple digits and you had no calculator, mechanical or otherwise. So you needed a compact way to, you know, divide a 3-digit number by a 2-digit number, for example. But the method, there's nothing intuitive about it. There's nothing revealing about it. So if you look at the method you're taught in school, you may be taught some kind of mnemonic to memorize the steps. But there's nothing about the method that teaches you anything about numbers, about mathematics, even about division, right? There's nothing, it's a purely mechanical symbol manipulation type method. And it was designed to save paper when paper was very expensive and people writing with, an inkwell and dipping a pen in ink, and it's persisted and persisted and persisted. And it's one of the, it just happens to be one of those things that gets argued about a lot in UK education. Or, it's interesting, we often argue about multiplication tables, like, do children need to know their multiplication tables? And I don't know, in the US, did children do multiplication tables at school, like 1 times 9 is 9, 2 times 9 is 18, that kind of thing?
I remember seeing them as like classroom objects on the wall, but I don't remember being drilled on it or having any activities.
So it's a big topic even now in England. It's a big topic, is like, kids are going to school and not learning their multiplication tables. And all these arguments of why you have to learn them. And what's really interesting is that, so in England, we did them up to the 12 times table. This was vitally important because, it was pointed out that the year has 12 months. So you're often, using 12. Well, in Japan, they've never had a 12 times table. The tables here are called kuku, which means 9 by 9. You only do them up to 9. And Japan has functioned quite well with a times table up to 12. But when we start picking it, we then think about this 5-paragraph essay you mentioned. A task where kids go and look up something in a library book and report back. Or, in the US, there's this thing called science fair, where children make a large poster allegedly on a scientific topic, or show and tell, and all these kind of things that are very deeply cultural and yet completely arbitrary, probably of no use to anyone. And maybe, this abundance of cheap computing power will hopefully make us question some of this. And like you say, where is it going? And I think, I'm sure you've read the Asimov books from, he was writing about our situation now in the 1940s and 50s. His book I, Robot, which is a book of, I think it's like 9 short stories on, he had this field, robo-psychology. There's one story in particular that comes to mind now, where they have some kind of supercomputer, artificial intelligence device, and they're looking at its predictions they're looking at the predictions it made for the future, but from the past, and comparing them with the numbers. These are like food production figures. And they say, the robo-psychologist says this is very odd, because the computer is off, right? The numbers are wrong. And they're sort of investigating it and getting another computer to check the calculations and the predictions. And they sort of say, it's under predicting like rice yields or whatever. And the punchline of the story, and you can probably, I don't know if you're familiar with this story, but you can guess already, right, that it made some decision that was good for humanity, right, by giving humanity the wrong data, so humanity would change their behavior in the way that the all-seeing, all-knowing computing device knew was best. So what's going to happen when an AI starts giving us incorrect information because it knows it's better for us to have, right? If, let's say, you ask an AI device, how often do I need to exercise for a healthy heart? Maybe it knows that you should do, I don't know, 3 sessions a week of 30 minutes, but it knows that humans tend to do half of what they're told. It might produce some fake research saying the latest research says you need to do 6 times for an hour. and Johnny writes this in his 5-paragraph essay, but really what it's doing is it knows that humans are going to take the advice, divide it by 2. So yeah, what happens when when the computer knows itself better than us? I mean, I don't know, maybe you've experienced when you're looking on Amazon and it it's recommending all these books, and you're thinking, well, these are books that I've been thinking of buying. How does Amazon know? Well, Amazon is the company I've done business with the longest in my life. I realized recently that, and they've got all this data of, I'm addicted to buying books. I bought hundreds of books over the years from Amazon. And of course, occasionally I reviewed books as well, particularly when in the early days of Amazon, when if you reviewed 5 books, they would give you like a $12 coupon or something.
I don't remember that. Wow.
So Amazon know not just which books I've read, but what I think of them.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, when I was writing those reviews, they were only read by other humans. But of course, now Amazon would have AI that could go through. I don't know if Amazon are doing this, but I mean, Amazon could go through the reviews that I've written, because you had to log into the Amazon account to do it. And they could use my reviews to predict what books I'd like to buy. And I don't mean like based on what I said about the books, but maybe they could guess my reading level from the book, from the reviews, or they could know things about my socioeconomic level from my vocabulary choice or whatever.
And your personality as well,
and my
based on
exactly
the topics. Yeah,
exactly.
Your predilections.
Yeah, it's Amazon is now more human than human.
Well, it's a very good thing we've convened here this Friday to just sort of put all of this stuff on the table. We have exactly 7 minutes to resolve it if we're working on a time limit.
Yeah,
which I don't know that we are. And I don't, you and I have had conversations like this repeatedly over the years, too often with a long gap of time in between them. So sometimes when we reconvene, we rehash old stuff. I just wonder, I don't run into many people through my daily life who are tracking stuff at this level with this level of interest. And are we, it's not so much, I'm going to put it this way, are we the outliers? And I don't know that that's quite the right term, but I think whatever it is that brings us to this curiosity, this sort of geeky nerdiness, whatever it is, and we think we know, have a sense of what's going on, the history, the traditions, the broader cultural and political and sociological implications. Does anybody care? And is this, of course it's worth talking about just as intellectual curiosity, and we share some interest, but what are we going to do with this concern, this knowledge, whatever it is? And are we even right? Are we missing something? I think in matters like this, I tend to defer to you, just because you're such an autodidact, and you always impress me with things that you know and have access to, and that sort of confirms my own processes and thinking about it. But what are we doing here? And does it matter? And who cares?
I mean, I think we're both kind of excited about some of this stuff and the potential of it. And I mean, you're a pioneer of podcasting. I mean, I had in fact forgotten that I'd been involved in a very early podcast in 2003, 2004, which is now like 20 years ago.
Going on 20, yeah.
And we were at that time, and I guess the podcast that I did with these people was just kind of lost in the ether. But we were calling into a voice bridge, and someone had some bit of software that would that would get an audio off the voice bridge, and then you had to put it in another bit of software to encode it as an MP3. And then I mean, this is before iTunes or anything, and you publish it on a website, on a blog with an RSS wrapper and this kind of thing.
Mm.
And I think, you and I have, we've seen a lot. I mean, and sometimes we've made very good use of this. I mean, although I detest social media, I mean, Facebook has saved my life in the kind of non-metaphorical way, in that I've used it to raise $100,000 or whatever that's paid for my life-saving cancer treatment.
Absolutely.
But even before then, I remember you and Christopher had introduced me to this thing called Twitter, and I found some other people that were using Twitter, and there were these, ironically, there were these offline Twitter meetups, these tweet-ups or whatever they were called in Tokyo. I went there and met some people, and we did a huge conference, a free conference for 100 people, Tokyo Bar Camp, held at Sun Microsystems, and had a massive impact on my life. I mean, there's still loads of people I know, close friends here from that event, that came out of you introducing me to Twitter. Another thing you introduced me to was this bizarre thing, Second Life, which I recently discovered is still going, is still teeming with life, and it's just fascinating. It's just so I think that's one thing, is that we've seen a lot, we've been excited about things. Sometimes the tools have been just kind of the wrong side of viable, and there was a limited, or you had like chain tools together, and then sometimes a free tool would just like disappear. So I think, that is maybe of interest to other people who haven't been through this. And I guess, although the vast majority of people wouldn't be informed in the way that we are, I think there is a significant group of people who are concerned and or interested, but don't have the knowledge to kind of dig into it themselves. So I think it's a value, it's the kind of like when Steve Jobs explained to Steve Wozniak that, yes, there are lots of people that would love to build a computer, but there are far more people who would love to use a computer without having to build it. And that was what Apple was founded on, this idea that, if you could have a computer for people to use without them having to build it. Now, they were thinking of a computer to use in the sense of programming a computer. Now, we've kind of got to a stage where Chat GPT can program for us, which is kind of amazing. So I think that's why maybe this is of value. But also, I think it's always fascinating to document this kind of stuff, to look at, in the future. I mean, my parents gave me a paper diary, as they often do, and they lie empty, and I've now been kind of writing stuff, because I just think, I wish I had journaled at a young age and kind of had this stuff to share with kids and friends or whatever. And another thing I think is that like a similar thing is, it's very useful to predict things and then go back and see how accurate your predictions were, and try and think why you were led in that direction. And that's basically the only way you can get better at predicting and about decision making in general, right? The only thing you can really do is document a decision you're making and why you're making it, and then look back on it in months or years time and think, like, why was I so dumb, or was it a reasonable decision at the time? Because I think it's fair to say, like, Chat GPT has changed everything, but it's not going to be the thing at all. I mean, it's going to be a little memory, like whatever what was the thing made by the Twitter company? Was it before iTunes was big? There was like a website for podcasts. Was it not Pod?
Oh, there were a lot of them. I can't remember.
Yeah, there was one very popular one, and then they basically closed it down as soon as iTunes added podcasting capability.
You mean the one where you could make your own podcast?
I think this one was a podcast indexing thing. You could like list your podcast on it, and the guys said they just woke up one morning and Apple had added podcast to iTunes, and they knew their company was dead. But fortunately, they had this side project called Twitter.
Oh,
So yeah, there was the company
Audio.
and they had they had a podcasting site, and fortunately, yeah, their dumb side project Twitter became quite a big thing.
And aren't those the guys who started Blogger originally?
Yes, I or maybe they were early investors. Yeah, like Blogger was. I think again, like Blogger absolutely changed my life. I went to a talk on blogging when it was a new thing in the UK. I remember someone had a T-shirt that said, "I'm blogging this," and everyone just thought it was the coolest, most hilarious T-shirt. because the vast majority of people didn't know what a blog was, hadn't heard of blogging, and it was this really kind of in thing. And I think, there's loads of people who haven't heard of ChatGPT. They haven't got the memo. They last. So go ahead.
I said this is true.
Yeah.
People don't know a thing about ChatGPT.
Yeah, and now Google is now just publicly releasing their offering called BARD, which was based on an internal project called Lambda. And if you remember, there was that weird news story a few months ago of the Google engineer who announced to the world that Lambda was sentient and didn't want to die, and that Google engineer was kind of ridiculed and lost his job.
But this is like the 40s and 50s and 60s science fiction just coming here.
Yeah, exactly. And
I would if I may, I'd like to do two things.
Sure.
Quickly. And I don't have a whole lot of time remaining. I've got a day ahead of me, but one is, I think perhaps I hope we continue this and we meet each Friday and we have a talk and we record it, and what we're going to do with these recordings, I don't know. We'll find out. But you mentioned that Facebook saved your life in a non-metaphorical sense. I think that's almost a direct quote of what you said.
Yeah.
That's the important and most powerful and salient factoid that's come my way in this conversation. There's been a lot of interesting stuff, and I hope we can delve into that more deeply, and also the work that you're doing now to, in a non-metaphorical way, help and perhaps save the lives of others, and bringing people to Japan for different treatments based on your experience and your learning and all of that. This, I think we need to look into. I want to understand more about what you've done in that endeavor. That's one thing. I don't think we can discuss it right now, but please, let's put that on our shared Google document. I really want to flesh out that story and what you've done, what you're doing, and what you intend to do in the future, because that's better than any 5-paragraph essay I could ever write. The other one, just your mention of the Google engineer who got fired for the Lambda. Of course, I never heard of that before. You're paying attention on such a deeper level to all this different stuff. That's fascinating. But what it sparked for me was a quote. Well, there's all sorts of quotes. This is one I'm just going to throw out. I was walking in Saudi Arabia doing one of my evening walks with the iPhone, recording with the call to prayer sometimes popping up in the background. And at this point, there had just been a headline that, who's the guy who runs Facebook? Zuckerberg.
Yeah, Mark Zuckerberg.
Zuckerberg had been talking somewhere, and he said something like 80% of the American people get their news from Facebook. And was that a brag or was it a point of shame? I don't know, but it was a fact.
Yeah.
And this is several years ago, so it was kind of tied into 2016 and all of that. But the one that I want to ask you about or bring up here towards the end was Elon Musk, the guy who now owns Twitter or something like that. But a few years back, again, it's about that same time frame as that Zuckerberg quote, saying that we're all in a simulation. This is all a simulation. All reality is a simulation. Yep. And that takes us back to the idea of virtual reality. Of course you remember that. What was either your take on it at the time or the popular conception of that point? And then what are your thoughts today on that?
Yeah,
idea?
I think it's, I think what he was pointing out was that, we can't know if we're in a simulation or not, just as we can't know if we're dreaming or not, because we're not if we're able to step out one layer, then who's to say there's not another layer outside of that? And I often think, like, you may as well live your life as if you're in a simulation, because it's quite a useful, practical way to live your life. Or, I mean, I think you and I both, you've lived in Japan, you've lived in Saudi Arabia, you lived before, was it Thailand or something?
Correct, yeah.
Often it does feel you're in a movie or some kind of simulation. My Japanese is still terrible, so often I'm only vaguely aware of the subtleties of what's going on around me.
Sure.
And often it is like I feel it's like being in a point and click adventure game. That if you remember the games like Maniac Mansion or Secret of Monkey Island, because I've often got a mission, like I need to go and get some items from somewhere and take them to somewhere else, and maybe fill out a form and find a non-player character to give me assistance. And it's just like being in a simulation. So in the end, for me, it's almost an academic point of, are we in a simulation or not? It's like, well, it's still useful to live like, life is a game. And it's also, I think, there's like a poetic dimension to it. If you think of like the world, the world is a game that's been set up for you to enjoy and explore. And it's not so different from being in Second Life. But it's interesting that, Elon Musk has warned for a long time about the dangers of AI. And he was one of the people involved in OpenAI that, did ChatGPT, that was, originally a non-profit thing and recently became a for-profit thing. And I believe it's, the majority of stake is owned by Microsoft. But then, it's, it's interesting that all, we have a lot of fun in cyberspace, but then there is, real world impact, things like I've been able to raise real money and buy stuff. And I remember you telling me, you were like the first person telling me about the kinetic impact of a worm, and this was I can't think of the name, but what was that worm?
That was Stuxnet, I believe.
Stuxnet, that was it. Yeah. So Stuxnet was a worm, I think it's like a Windows XP worm, because presumably the Israeli intelligence services found that the Iranian uranium enrichment plants were using Windows PCs to control the centrifuges, and that by spreading this worm, you could get the centrifuge to unbalance and cause physical damage. And this allegedly was like the first example of an online thing having a real kinetic impact. And I remember you were very amazed by it, and I didn't really see the significance at the time, and like now it's like, oh, of course Scott was right. This is really a game-changing thing. And of course,
Wait, hold on. What did you just say?
So I remember you were very kind of.
No, just at the very end about Scott, you said Scott was what?
Of course, Scott was right that this was really like a game-changing thing, because I remember at the time you were like, this is such a big thing that this worm has had a real world kinetic. Kinetic was like this military term. They were, the military was going about kinetic warfare and cyber warfare, but this was like a cyber warfare thing having a kinetic impact.
Right.
And if you remember in the 1980s, when people used to go on about viruses, the media did talk about them as if they were having like real kinetic impact when they weren't.
Mm-hmm.
And like the more informed people were saying like, well, this stuff will never have an impact in the real world. It's just this overblown, overhyped thing for the antivirus software industry. But then, I remember you saying like, well, Stuxnet has changed everything, because we've got this worm, this bit of software that was like spread, targeted, but not massively targeted. I mean, it was a Windows XP security hole, and
designed specifically to attack a piece of Siemens machinery.
Yeah,
a specific device and a specific thing.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. How do we monetize this prescience?
Well, you go long or you go short on certain shares. Well, I mean, just today, Jack Dorsey as the co-founder of Twitter, has been talking in the media that some investment shorting company has been saying that he's been mismanaging his payment startup that he's been doing, and the payment startup hasn't had proper security controls to stop criminals using it. And
mm-hmm.
So yeah, well, that's one way. One way to monetize stuff is to bet against it. Another way is to bet on it. And presumably, there are lots of people doing that. I mean, we haven't even mentioned NFTs or the cryptocurrency stuff. There's so much all happening at once.
Well, let's put this on the agenda for next week. You know about the audio tweet, right? Have you heard about the audio tweet as
No.
Not a particular audio tweet, just the generic idea of audio tweet, the genre, if you will, the art form?
Not really. It's not. So this thing Teapot, right? TPOT, this part of Twitter. So the idea that like Twitter has these like multi-layered things, and I've seen you've done audio tweets.
Well, that's all I'm talking about. I'm talking only about what I've done.
Yeah,
but forget Twitter. I developed the audio tweet, the idea of a still image with audio attached to it.
Okay.
The whole original purpose for me was to have something on Twitter that they could click and hear my voice without going to another site. And Twitter has built in a functionality that they call audio tweet that doesn't necessarily have an image, but it's just being able to hear audio through the Twitter website.
So how were you doing it technically originally then? Like how did it work?
That's a particular application, and I think it's only on the iPhone instance, Voice Record Pro.
Yep.
You add an image to the audio file and it saves it to your iPhone photo roll as an M4A movie, which when it's uploaded to Twitter is a picture that plays audio, and then I add a little bit.
Yep.
But why am I talking about it now? I had a reason for bringing
that you could have made loads of money from it, maybe. If you...
No, that wasn't even it. The audio tweet. See, this is what happens, Matthew. I get sidetracked. I forget what my point in mentioning it was. I'm sorry. I'm totally lost. Help me out.
Well, I always think of you and Bicycle Mark as pioneering soundscapes. I always think that, that was like one of your huge contributions to the world was, I remember when I first saw Bicycle Mark. He was giving a talk at the Chaos Communication Congress about this thing he called citizen journalism. And one of the things he mentioned was about walking around a market in Amsterdam with his recorder on, and people being really interested in this. And, at the time I had just started listening to Tokyo Calling, and, you would like record your commute to work, and there would be these amazing sounds. And, I had lived in Japan. I'd like spent 18 months in Japan. I was stuck back in the UK, and it was like this lifeline. It was like, the sounds of Shinjuku Station or whatever, or you getting a drink from a vending machine.
Yeah.
And it was incredible, this idea of a soundscape. And I don't know if you remember, there was a guy who was using binaural audio to do this. And I think he was Japan based, right? So, for our viewers and listeners, binaural audio is when you have left and right microphone about the same distance apart as the average human head, which means that when you listen with headphones, you get this amazing rich sound. I don't know if you remember who that guy was.
That guy was Rich P-A-V, but his last name was much longer. It was
we should look him up, find out where he is.
Yeah, he was an interesting guy. I got to know him briefly, but that was not my reason for bringing up the audio tweet. Thank you for this. Yeah, the cavalcade of audio memories, Bicycle Mark, Scottlo, and Rich Pab.
But I still find this stuff exciting. I mean,
but here's why I brought up the audio tweet. It's not self-congratulatory, although we're always welcome to talk about
Japan's first.
But you Japan's first podcast. You mentioned NFTs, non-fungible tokens, and crypto. I had this weird fever dream that I could turn an audio tweet into an NFT.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
So like the first instance, I don't understand how NFTs work. So let's also put this on the agenda for next week. Because I always thought when I first got a sense of what NFTs are about is that this is something people are going to make money off of. Yeah. So is there some way but it's got to have this idea of either scarcity or desirability or going viral, that people have to want it. But why does owning the first edition of a digital artifact matter? So let's save that for later. I realized that our former president was doing NFTs a while back, and I don't know what became, or maybe his wife was doing something with it. And then the Bitcoin crashed several months ago. So it's all such a roller coaster of a thing. But I was actually sorry for laughing, but so often is the case with yours truly is that I get just like this probably misguided conception of the functionality or the possibility, and I run with it. And I'm able to speak seemingly to sound as though I know what I'm talking about, with this air of authority, which is just the result of the voice. So I'm saying it, and then people might believe it, but my understanding at the time is what I just said a moment ago, and I'll try to repeat it once more in case anybody missed it. That gonna create an audio tweet and somehow make it into this NFT so that people are gonna buy it, and I'm gonna make $1 million off the audio tweet. Like, it's kind of daft and insane, and it's not the full concept of what NFTs are meant to be. But that's what I love doing, just sort of blurring the lines, and it's all not enough knowledge to make it happen, but just sort of plausibility.
Let's do it. I mean, do you remember the $1 Million homepage? No. So some guy in the late 1990s just had this idea of you could make a website with where there's a 1 million pixel page and sell advertising space $1 per pixel, and he'd become a millionaire. And he did, and paid to get himself through university. I mean, these smart ideas, you just go with them, because I mean, the key is to be working on several things at once. Don't worry about how viable it is, because if you don't, someone else is going to do it. I mean, Someone's going to be
maybe
doing
somebody listening to this.
the audio NFT. But but there is a huge gap between having the idea and actually doing it. But maybe, yeah, now with all these tools, now there are these no code app creation things where you really can make a bit of software by dragging and dropping blocks or whatever. And you could, you could make your audio NFTs, and then how about, what would be terrible, but like celebrities, when their baby is born, they would record the audio of the first sound of their baby, knowing that in the future someone's going to buy it at auction for $1 million.
Okay, we're gonna have to keep this one in the can and not release, or at least edit this part out, because I think we're onto something, Matthew. But though, what's going to make it, there sort of has to be a marketplace for it. So the audio NFT marketplace could be on the $1 million homepage.
Could indeed, yeah.
But how do you find the? Oh, you pay $1 per pixel.
So you pay $1 per pixel, but I think the minimum was like 100 pixels. So people would.
Oh, I see. So it's just like banners or rectangles.
Yeah, exactly. But the guy just thought, well, if I can sell $1 per pixel, if I sell the whole page, I get $1 million. And
who's going to look at the page?
And he did it well. But it was a news, in the late 1990s, it was a newsworthy thing.
Yep.
I mean, people hadn't heard of the web, or were just hearing about it, and they're like, oh, this, and the guy would have been 16 or 17 or something.
We need to get him on the show. Where is he now?
We should. Well, he I think he went and did a computer science degree and is probably working for a big tech company. But yeah, just look up $1 million homepage on Wikipedia.
Maybe he's consulting for the Chinese.
Exactly. But yeah, there's so many interesting topics here, and each one I think really worthy of discussing. I mean, I've just here I've written a page of notes. And
have you? Oh, thank you.
But well, I mean, just mainly keywords, but. And
can you put those in the Google? Can you put those in the Google document? We'll sort of brainstorm for next week.
But just thinking about the lingo, and how, before I had heard of NFTs, I didn't know the word fungible, and it took me quite a while to work out what it meant. And okay, well, yeah, a paper US dollar is highly fungible, in that the dollars in my pocket have the same value and is interchangeable as yours. And if I lend you $1 and next week you give me back $1, I'm not interested if it's the same physical dollar bill. And I generally wouldn't expect it to be the same dollar bill, because presumably you spent it and you're giving me a replacement dollar. And then a non-fungible token, as in something that is unique and cannot be copied in any meaningful way. But then what does it mean if it's a digital thing?
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, we really need to wrap up. Remember that Martin Shkreli? He was the pharmaceutical.
Oh, of course, who bumped up the price of was it the EpiPen or something?
Something. I think it was several different products that were just astronomically priced.
Was it Pharma bro, wasn't it? He was the Pharma.
As a Pharma bro, but I forget the name of the band, but it's one of these bands with a hip hop band with a tremendous cult following. And if I tried to say their name, I would say it wrong, so I won't even try. But he got a master of one of their rare albums, and he bought it at auction for an enormous price.
Yeah,
and then he wouldn't play it or something like that.
Yeah, there was someone recently who algorithmically generated every possible combination of notes and then released them into the public domain, so that no one could copyright a riff anymore.
Oh my.
Because there are these patent trolls, aren't there, who kind of do the opposite, where they buy up an old patent and then use it to attack other people.
Yeah. Yeah, there's all sorts of grifters out there. Just to show that I can access Wikipedia. The album was Once Upon a Time in Shaolin.
Okay.
by Wu-Tang Clan.
Oh, Wu-Tang Clan, excellent.
And he purchased the master, and then a single copy in 2015 sold it for what, bought it for whatever.
And then they said,
$2 million. And
yeah.
apparently NPR had a report in 2021 that somebody has finally bought the album. So yeah, the amazing stuff. One last thing, if you don't mind, have you spent any time with the Jackpot trilogy by William Gibson?
No, although I recently did listen to all the, well, not recently, a year and a half ago, I re-listened to audiobooks of a lot of the old William Gibson stuff.
Oh.
Neuromancer and what was the short story collection you took first on? Burning Chrome, was it?
I can't remember the title, but yeah.
Yeah.
There's somewhere there's that line of the describing the sky over the Chiba Bay looking like the color of the television between the channels or something like that. I encourage you to at least check out some reviews of Agency and Peripheral. Those are the only two I've read. I don't know that it's actually a full trilogy yet. If the third one's come out. But
yeah, I will.
Several of these topics that we've discussed are presented very artfully and frighteningly in these, so sort of like almost like a time travel dimension as well, that if we're in a simulation now, that it's actually being the puppet masters are 400 or 500 years in the future, and they've worked out a way to not quite do time travel. It's really it's thought-provoking and fun, and also very alarming. So take a peek if you have time and interest. You lover of books, you.
Well, I'm gonna stop the recording now.